So again, the White House saying the president may be open to the short-term increase in the debt ceiling, but they would prefer something longer. I want to get a little bit more perspective, more reaction to what's happening here from a member of the Senate Republican leadership, John Barrasso of Wyoming. The senator joins me now here to get his take on where this stands. First of all, thanks for the time. And
thank you, Peter.
What do you all, Republicans here in the Senate, make of what John Boehner has put on the table?
Well, as the White House just said, it's a hypothetical. We'll have to see what actually passes the House. I know senators are very concerned, Republican senators, about increasing the debt ceiling at a time we have $17 trillion of debt. And Harry Reid is proposing and has filed in the Senate to increase the debts by $1 million a minute from now all the way till December of 2014, $1 trillion. And there's no way you can do that without actually getting spending under control, and I can't imagine how we would support such a thing.
The White House has questions whether or not John Boehner can actually pass this in the House of Representatives. Sounds like you have some questions as well.
Well, we'll see what the House can pass. I think the American people want us who are elected to govern. They want us to work together. The president has continued to say no to negotiations. He has now invited Republican senators to the White House tomorrow morning. I plan to be there to talk with the president. But if it's just a photo op, then I don't think it's worthwhile. If he's going to lecture us, it's not worthwhile. If he wants to actually discuss the problems we have in this country with spending, as he asks now for a 6th increase in the debt ceiling since he's been president. And remember, this is something that when he was in the Senate, he voted against. He said was failed leadership and said raising the debt ceiling was unpatriotic.
What about the fact that John Boehner has made this offer to the president, but it says nothing about the shutdown? There is no offer on the table for actually ending the government shutdown. What should we make of that? The White House says we're not going to sit down and talk about these larger budget issues while the government's still not operating.
I want to get the government opened. I want to get people back to work. We've just had a Senate Republican lunch talking about various proposals to try to get the government open and get people back to work, and I'm going to continue to work on those.
Can you give us a sense what some of those are? We heard even from Rob Portman the other day this idea about reopening the government, but including some of the proposed spending cuts that the president's talked about. Is that where you all are headed?
That's one. Susan Collins has a proposal out there. Mike Enzi, my colleague from Wyoming, has something called the penny plan to get spending under control. There are a number of different options out there to get the government open.
Are you willing to concede, Republicans willing to concede that right now public opinion here is tilted towards the Democrats? The president has the leverage, the upper hand right now?
I don't think America wins under this circumstance. I don't think anyone is the winner in this. I think it's important for all of us to work together to get the government open. The president ought to be engaged in discussions and deliberations, and he ought to be working with Congress to get it done.
Do you take the offer for you and the other Senate Republicans to join the president at the White House tomorrow as a sincere offer, as the first opportunity to actually have some real negotiations?
Well, I initially thought that, and then this morning in the Washington Post, front page story says, well, and there's not going to be any negotiations. So if we go to the White House, I would go intending to negotiate, not to be lectured to.
Let me ask you about the big issue that came up today. Secretary Lew was testifying in front of the Senate Finance Committee. This issue about prioritization. He basically testified it's the same thing as default, just another name. What do you make of this notion that if we were to go past October 17th, when the bills come due, as long as the government pays off bondholders, pays the interest on the debt, that, again, we could avoid catastrophe?
Well, we need to get the spending under control. Families prioritize how they spend their money, and as they pay their bills, I think that it's a way to go. But I obviously think the bigger problem is the spending. We got to get the spending under control. We cannot continue to put this sort of debt on the backs of our children and grandchildren at a time where parents are anxious. You know, they have aspirations for their families, but they're angry as well as anxious about the future for these young people. Will they be able to get jobs in this economy? What's their future going to be?
Is it fair to say that you're hearing mixed reviews about all this from folks back in Wyoming? People angry about what's happening? People asking you to maybe change your own position on some of these issues?
Well, I voted to keep the government open. I support opening the government. You know, when you look at the national parks, Yellowstone, Grand Teton, and you see some of the pain,
for business.
Some of the pain that this president, in my opinion, has decided to impose on Americans, whether you see it here at the World War II Memorial, putting up barricades at a place that's never barricaded. It's not barricaded at night. It's not barricaded over weekends. But the president decides, through his perhaps Secretary of Interior, through the Park Service, to put up barricades at turnouts on the roads in Wyoming, on the little pathways, so people can ride their bikes or jog safely instead of doing it on the side of the road, and then to give tickets to those individuals who are trying to just be safe on their bikes or jogging, it just doesn't make a lot of sense to have this kind of really looks like vindictive behavior by this White House.
All right, Senator Barrasso, thank you for the time. The View, Deirdre, from the Senate Republican leadership here in Washington as we await the next move. House Republicans going to the White House this afternoon to meet with the president as well.
Peter, thanks as always, our chief Washington correspondent. Peter Cook there, Senator Barrasso.